I'm kind of like I think people like my because I'm kind of a unique kind of character.
And I have
Yeah,
the
analytics
same
is
thing.
like-
And I love to like
You just see how games and possessions
Safe to say
more
that
intense, how they mean more.
I'm not
Right?
putting him on.
I think the U.S. is going to obviously win this.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Nothing But Respect. We have a very special episode in store for you. And not just because I'm joined as always by Harry Krinsky, which I am, but because we have Ray Ratto of Defector.com here to join us for a special episode to talk about refereeing and officiating. So Ray, the first question is, why is the NBA rigged against my favorite team?
Well, because we cannot trust fixing the results to people like Vivek Ranadive alone.
It requires a greater intervention.
Anybody can lose 58 games a year. But to get over the hump and get to 70, you need to do more corrupt business. And that's where the referees come in.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, we're having you on because you have this great wealth, and you're gonna hate me saying nice things about you, but unfortunately,
yeah, so stop it.
You're sort of a captive audience here. But you have this great wealth of knowledge about officiating and the specific referees and the ways the practice has changed. And despite our best efforts, you have refused to write about it for the website. So we're going to talk to you today about the sort of theory, practice, and history of officiating.
I try to give the readers what they want, and they've made it clear what they want is not that.
So how did you get focused on this specific kind of idiosyncratic subcategory of basketball?
I don't know that I ever got focused as much as it was just sort of part of the landscape when I was starting the business 116 years ago. And officials mattered more then. You knew who they were, you knew how they worked. There were no bailouts. It was just sort of them against the world. And they had to figure out how to do their job, make sure that the players got to do their jobs, and do it in such a way that everybody came away only slightly disgruntled, as opposed to now where they all feel like they're getting screwed on every time down the floor. And the fans seem to think it's even worse than that. So you just it was just part of the landscape then. Now it's people you don't know doing stuff you don't understand, or people who don't understand what they do or why they get paid for it.
There's a lot of, one of the interesting things in there is like this idea that basically no one can come away from any exchange involving a referee or like a refereed game being happy. But I guess one of the points you made is that maybe wasn't always the case, that maybe like officials were better. So I guess the first thing I want to ask is like, was officiating better, I don't know, 30, 40 years ago?
I don't know if there's a way to measure that, but players and coaches and even fans seemed to be okay with the idiosyncrasies back then, because there was no bailout. There was no replay. There was no Secaucus. There was, no sort of I'm always right. I mean, it was back in the day, there was just the 12 people on the floor. And they had to sort of figure out how to coexist with each other 82 times a year. And so officials learned how to talk to players and be talked to by players. And players learned how to find workarounds, this referee as opposed to that one. And it was just sort of a weird symbiotic relationship where nobody was ever fully happy, but nobody was as unhappy as they seemed to be on a regular old Tuesday night in New Orleans.
Yeah, I guess that is true. That like, I feel like just anecdotally, I've seen more players do the like Luka hands up complaining straight to the ref than they did maybe when I first started watching basketball. And like, I guess the replay center, I feel like, is a sort of crucial thing here because that comes into play, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago. And I think one of the things that does is establish this false standard that there is like a perfection attainable, that like the referee's job is to be correct all the time, make the 100% right call. There always is this right call. There's no subjectivity, which I feel like is sort of a impossible standard to live up to, right?
Well, it A is impossible, and B, they want this impossible standard while still holding on to the concept of advantage disadvantage, which is that the game is fluid and you have to be able to understand what's going on in the game at a fairly high level to be able to officiate it in such a way that all 10 players get to operate. And the idea that somehow, getting the minutiae of the call right, as opposed to adjudicating an entire game, is now the new default. And it's a terrible default, because officiating, like basketball itself, is kind of an art form. And you have to view it that way, or you'll be not just disappointed, you'll be slowly but measurably enraged every night because your guy is getting screwed. And now that you add gambling, your guy is getting screwed because everybody's doing the business. So, it's what happens when lay people try to improve something they don't understand. They inevitably make it worse.
It is kind of a funny thing. I have thought about, like, my main gripe when I have gripes with refereeing is entirely about like flow of game. I'm almost just sort of unilaterally against any foul call unless it's my team, because I'm like, I want more play. And to that end, it is kind of funny that the answer has the problem was, hey, we want to approach perfection and refereeing nirvana. Instead of, I don't know, having a fourth ref, they're like, let's have a computer do it, or like, let's have a guy in Secaucus and like more cameras. There is a way to throw more resources at it that's closer to understanding that it's an art form. Then we're gonna have, what do they call it, the X-ray camera, or the Hawkeye camera.
Yeah, the tennis one.
Yeah. Well, I will just say this. The more ways you rely on non-humans to do something that is a very human task, the worse it becomes by definition. It's what you get when you get owners who don't want to pay these guys anyway, to basically try to get them off the payroll, even if it means spending a lot more money on machinery. I mean, if you're going to do that, then just get robots to play. Why bother, with the vagaries of a draft choice that might not work out, when you can go to MIT and have them build you a Victor Wembanyama of your own, and then everybody can have one.
That would be, yeah. Every team deserves a Wemby. I think the notion of refereeing as an art form is like one of the most. I really want to dig in on that. And I want to ask you a leading question, which is sort of a bullshit question, which is like, how could refereeing possibly be an art form? There's a rule book. It says the rules are laid out. Like the entry for foul is 5,488 words long the last time I checked. But still, like, there are rules, and aren't these people just officiating the rules as they exist? How is there any of the like interpretation and expression inherent to artistry in there?
Because of the always dangerous phrase. And I'm trying to remember it now. It's advantage, disadvantage. You have to judge, because it is a modified contact sport. You are asking the official to determine what is sufficient contact, what is fair contact. And you have to do that with a sliding scale of measurements every time down the floor. And if you're going to call it by the rules, you're going to have basketball games that last as long as college football.
Right. Yeah.
There'll be 4 hours. People will be fighting constantly, and there will be deaths. Now, I grant you, in the modern American diaspora, death is really entertaining, but I don't know if you can sell it in 15 games per night over 160 game or 160 nights.
I mean, it's like, did they go to
You'll run
commercial
out
when
of
they
people
die?
eventually. Yeah, it just
You have Kobe Sanders as the best player in the NBA within a month.
oh yeah. I mean, just the Hall of Fame would be all the Rick Mahorn robots you can make. It's just that. It's you want this to be a fluid game. And above and beyond the fact that every player is at heart a cheater of one way or another, because they're always looking for that one advantage that they're not entitled to have. You have to have officials who know human nature as much as they know everything else. And human nature and understanding it is entirely artistic, and it's not at all mechanical.
I think the point of like that, if you called it quote unquote by the book, there would be 15 fouls on every play is super important for understanding, and gets at this frustration that everybody has with their own understanding of modern reffing, where like, yes, people get grabbed away from the ball on every possession. People get a hand check. People get, whatever. And when you have an unlimited amount of, data and angles and ability to recall of that, you can always, corral that data. It almost reminds me of like polling data. Like you can morph any polling data into whatever narrative you want. And I guess I'm weirdly in a position where I'm saying polling data is more important than basketball data. It's hard to say.
Well,
until Scott Foster runs for Congress and we can really decide, until those two realities are up in direct conflict against each other.
Yeah, I would take Scott Foster in Congress in a moment. Not
Well,
necessarily
nice
because he would be a good politician, but because the ones we've got now suck on ice.
Well,
But no, what's a bump?
Right.
What's
You're in
permissible
Bushwick, it's something
down
very
on the
different.
block, and why do you get to contact the guy more down there than you do at 38 feet? It's the
No,
nature
totally.
of the game. If you want complete non-contact basketball, you'll get it, and then the league will fold in 2 years, and you'll be staring at your computer desperately looking for some new way to watch animated car crashes. It's you. At some point, you have to have people who can tell when a game is starting to lose its flow, and either cajole the players to modify their behavior, or call the game in such a way that they modify the behavior on their own. Because ultimately, you're selling a show.
Yeah, it is sort of interesting because I feel like most people's understanding of the referees is like carceral. Like these are like enforcers of justice, but I almost feel like the more accurate way to describe them would be like real-time art critics. Like they are, would you say that they're like as responsible for sort of shaping the like output? Maybe not as responsible, but like it's sort of hard to reckon with the like how much the enforcement of the boundaries of the game is subjective and then how much those matter. Like how many times have you started watching a game and you realize within 5 minutes either like, oh, they're letting everything go tonight or they're calling everything tonight. And like that choice really informs not only the outcome of the game, but like the aesthetic experience of watching it,
Well, there've always been different kinds of officials, guys who do like to let them play and guys who tend to be tighter. And historically, they all sort of converged on some amorphous middle, where the dogmatic ones either got weeded out or adjusted the way they worked. I mean, I don't know that I can cite the number of times I watched a guy try to draw a foul and have Joey Crawford standing over them and going, "Get your ass up." We're not calling that tonight. And technically that would be a foul, but they know that it's not a foul in the most rational way of viewing it, given the sport that they're working on. There was a lot less flopping back then, a lot less selling of calls, because you had referees who wouldn't buy the sale. They just go, "No, you're not doing that." Be an adult. They're paying you to play. Get over your ass. And there's a lot less of that now because there's this greater insistence on you have to call all the contact. Well, if you want to call all the contact, fine. But you're going to have 4-hour games that nobody will want to watch. It just,
To the back then and now point, can you walk us through like some of the, it'll take a long time. I want to start at like the 90s and then get to present, but like when did the wheels fall off? Where did they fall off? Like what were these, edicts and technological advances and de-advantages and cultural changes that have kind of taken us from, 90s hand check, rough and tough, Jordan rules basketball to whatever panopticon we're in now?
Well, you can look at television ratings for starters, because the NBA was a hard watch when the Pistons were good, and then all of a sudden they became a fun watch for more people when Jordan supplanted, the bad boys. But there are other subtle things that nobody ever cites because they don't view this as an officiating issue. It's when they first went to three person crews had one great flaw, and that is you are not adding 30 more people who are as good as the 60 that you've got. At best, you are hiring officials 61 to 90 who are not as good. And a bad official can F up a game a lot easier than a good official can repair it. So that was the start. There was the moment that Darell Garretson became the head of officials, because he was a very good official, but he was very imperious. He didn't talk to players. He didn't like to talk to players. And players learned, don't talk to Darell.
Was that unusual when he was a referee? Was he sort of one of like the least player friendly guys in his day?
Among that group, yeah. Because, most of the people that came on before him, you had to get along with players. Otherwise you'd get swallowed.
And can we actually I want to back up. Can you tell us a little about Darell Garretson? Because this is a name that's new to me.
Okay. He was an elite official in the, I want to say, late 70s, 80s, and 90s. He was considered the gold standard, but he also had a titanium rod up his ass, in that he thought he was working for the Supreme Court, and there was just nothing about him that said that's a warm and friendly guy. He operated largely through fear and the complete confidence that he knew what he was doing. And it was well-earned confidence. It just, he wore it badly. And so when he stopped officiating and became the head of officials, he wanted everybody to do it the way he did it. And uniformity, as much as this seems antithetical, is the worst thing you can do with a group of officials. You have to let them be who they are, within limits. You can't, have somebody who says, oh, sure, you can bring a javelin onto the floor. And you also can't have somebody who said, geez, I think you breathed on him a little hard. We're going to have to get you for that. There was a self-enforced medium that, allowed for some flexibility. And it was up to the players to know which officials wanted to call a tight game, which ones you could talk to, all that. They had to learn the idiosyncrasies. So when they went to the third official, now there's 90 of them rather than 60. And back in the day when Garretson broke in, there were probably 30. So it wasn't hard to learn who the officials are. Now, I just went through the officials media guide today. There's like 85 of them. You can't get 85 people, to drink coffee at breakfast. But they want that, and they want them all the same, and they want every call to be delivered the same, and they want a level of uniformity that A, they can't have, which makes puts the official on the spot, and B, that you shouldn't want to have, because if one of them was going to honor James Harden's flop, they all had to honor it.
Right.
And what happened? It took 10 years to change that rule, because everybody else who was watching this and paying for it was going, this sucks. And, if you're going to tell the officials you have to call that, okay, well, they have to call it. But if you keep calling it for 10 years, the game starts to blow. I would much rather have somebody standing over James Harden and going, get up off the floor. You're embarrassing us. We have a standard here, and you being a mop isn't helping.
And it's a bit of
that sort of flexibility. I'll just finish real fast.
Sure.
That flexibility that made the league better, but I don't know if you can have that anymore, because there are too many officials and there are too many games, and the technology is too much of a crutch to get what you used to have.
I was just going to say, with the Harden thing, it's a great example where the ref becomes a conduit for the fan. Like the reason that the step back is it just rubbed people the wrong way, because it wasn't a fun athletic play. It felt like a kind of exploitation of a rule rather than something like exciting or awe-inspiring. So a group of refs reacting to that in a very human way and being like, I'm not going to reward that, is very different than a robot being like, well, it is technically a foul.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. He gamed the system, which is why people didn't like it. And, well, how's the system defined? By the play of different players who have different skill sets, different body types. And the marriage of all those body types is what makes basketball what it is. And if somebody's gaming the system and doing it well, all points to him. You'll go to the Hall of Fame for it, but it makes for a lousy experience. And ultimately, basketball is about entertainment, the Memphis Grizzlies notwithstanding.
I think your point about technology is a pretty crucial one here, because I think if you were the optimist would see the post Garretson, the Joey Crawford, Dick Bavetta, for worse mostly, Ken Mauer types who these sort of last vestiges of personality. It's okay, all those guys get replaced by the Germinus Petritises of the world. But then maybe, when this big class comes in, given 10 years, and more experience, they will be better. They have better relationships with the players. But I guess that's something you're making me realize is that's functionally impossible, because all of these people are coming up with the reality defining force of replay, and just knowing that the last 2-minute report exists, which is its own thing that we should talk about later. And that basically they are coming up under the specter of objectivity, and they're being raised to be art critics in essentially a computerized world, which kind of doesn't work.
Well, and also they're not allowed to have personality. The idea that a referee is there only to be seen but not heard, or not even seen at all, is stupid. Because part of cajoling 10 large people to find commonalities in the game itself requires 13 people who understand what's going on in that game. And personality in an official does not take away from the personalities of the players. Nobody ever said, you know what? I got a free Tuesday night. I'm going to go down to the arena and watch Earl Strom. Nobody's ever done that. Not even Mrs. Strom.
Okay, I'm so glad you brought up Earl Strom, because one of my favorite of your stories is the Earl Strom story. Can you tell everyone
Earl Strom story? Because there's hundreds of them, and I may have told you several.
Well, I was going to say the one about him beating the shit out of people, but that also probably doesn't narrow it down much. I think it was in maybe Rochester. It was with the fans.
Rochester. He had to fight his way off the court at the end of a game.
Can you explain A, who Earl Strom is, and B, explain why he had to fight his way off the court at the end of the game?
Earl Strom was an official in the league, I want to say for 25 years. In fact, wrote a book about it later that you guys should read, just because it will give you some historical perspective of what this used to be. And one night in Rochester, when there were like only 12 teams, the Royals lost a game where the fans didn't like the outcome. And they would come on the court, at the end of the night, because there's no security there. It's, it's ants on a dessert cart. And a few of them wanted to get chesty with him. And Earl Strom was built like an upright refrigerator. I mean, he wasn't huge, but he was just kind of thick, and you could tell that he has used a speed bag more than once. And he clocked about 3 or 4 people on his way off the floor. He didn't stay to hit them more than once, but the one time he did hit them, they stayed hit. And it sort of became a legend, as the stories, went around the league, to the point where his next time in Boston, Bill Russell came up to him and said, "So I heard you had to punch out Rochester the other night." And he said, "Sometimes you got to do what you got to do to get off the floor." And he goes, "Well, I'm not going to F with you tonight then." You think a player would do that now? No. It's antithetical to their current realm of existence to get friendly with an official. Even before the game starts, they don't know who they are. They don't care who they are. They're people who get in the way of their good time. And back then, everybody was sort of in it together because they weren't making a ton of money. There wasn't a big TV contract. You didn't have billionaires owning teams. In fact, you had some teams were owned by guys who weren't millionaires. But that was when a dollar was worth 80 cents and not the 12 cents it is today. It's just, he is also the guy who was working a December 23rd game in Seattle one year, and he lived in Philadelphia. And I believe it was the Sixers were playing the Sonics. And the game had been an absolute slog the whole night. Guys popping each other, foul parade. It was taking forever. And at one point, with about 8 minutes to go, one of the Philly writers yells at Earl during a timeout. I said, "Hey, Earl, we're trying to catch the red eye. Can you kick this up a bit?" And Earl says, "Don't worry, I'm on the same flight. We're going to be fine." And so for the last 6 minutes, it's roller derby. And with about 2 minutes to go, as I understand the story, Lenny Wilkins, who was the coach of the Sonics at the time, is yelling, "Earl, what's going on here? What, everything's fine now?" And as he runs by the Sonics bench, he looks at Wilkins and he says, "Ho, ho, ho, Lenny, it's that time of year." And Wilkins understood what that meant. And end of problem. They all made their flight home and life was good.
Yeah, that's like both teams are allowed to beat the shit out of each other in that situation. That's like, there's some equity there. And
they know what the deal is ahead of time.
Mm-hmm. Well, something I want to ask is like, I feel like Strom is a sort of important figure then to like understand in this like early history of officiating, like who else are the like important figures? Who was like the best referee in the 80s or whatever? Like, I don't know, who are some guys we should know?
Richie Powers, Garretson, to be sure, because he was a great official. Jack Madden. There are a lot of them, but it's because you saw them all the time more than the fact that they were necessarily great. It's just you were familiar with them. I can guarantee you the last time you watched the Kings, watching it,
Scott Foster worked their game yesterday. I will say, Scott Foster worked their game yesterday.
Yeah, and it worked out well for them, as I recall.
Yeah, he made sure they got the loss, and I'm eternally grateful to him.
God, it used to be like, oh my God, the Kings have a national TV game. This is so exciting. And now it's like you've got a referee that you've heard of for bad reasons. That's the bar of Kings.
But here's the thing. Scott Foster, and this I blame on the league. Scott Foster is the only referee most laymen know.
Mm-hmm.
And it's largely because of his very ancillary connection to the Tim Donaghy mudslide.
Mm-hmm.
But the idea that he's your only reference point means he's the villain. And like Warrior fans used to complain about him incessantly. And then one day I said, I'm going to see what their record is against this guy.
Sure.
They won like 89% of their games with him. I mean, if he's such a criminal, why is that number so high? Well, it's because the players are good. And you find out that it's really hard for an official to get in the way of a good team or get in the way of a bad team. Ultimately, everything finds its own level.
Right.
Which is why the Wizards are the Wizards. But that's it. It's just nobody knows the 5 best officials in the league. And Foster may be one of them, but he's not the universal number one anymore.
And he was at one point the best in the league.
I think he was, but at that point, he was already becoming like the figure of fun for everybody who wants to say that officials are either crappy or crooked.
Well, it's the whole.
Now, even though he's not nearly as imposing a figure as he used to be. I mean, he's been doing this for almost 30 years. He's going to slow down. I mean, it's like, Joey Crawford was infamous longer than he was famous, just because people want shorthand. And so they were convinced that every time they ever went to a game, Joey Crawford was working it. So apparently Joey Crawford was working 1,320 games every year simultaneously in different cities.
Someone's got to do it.
Well,
Can you? Because
no wonder his knees went out.
What I'm hearing is like there was a before where the ref and player relationship was at the very least, rowing in the same direction. And then one of the things you hear now often is there's so much, honestly, like reverence, and it's turned a little bit now into frustration with this idea of like, oh, it's actually kind of cool and gamesmanship to get one over on the ref, to like be, you even hear these things around like, chumming the refs or working the refs up, but just so you can get your calls, right? Which of course, to me, is understandable when there's like $30 million on the line. You're like, yeah, sure. If I can talk to this person during the game and it increase my chances of winning millions of dollars by some percentage, I'm going to do it. But when do you sense that shifted from we're rowing in the same direction to we're like in this cat and mouse adversarial game?
It never changed. Guys were trying to get the advantage back in 1948.
Okay.
So that's constant. But back then, or at least in the 70s when I started paying attention, there was more sort of leeway given to the official to go, stop bullshitting me. Okay. I've seen that done hundreds of times by people who retired before you were born. You're not fooling me.
Mm-hmm.
Now, because everything is replayable and everything is second guessed in Secaucus, you don't get that leeway anymore. You cannot put in your game report, I let a foul go because somebody was just pissing me off. He was trying to game the system. Because they don't want that. Right. They want the forms to all read the same because they want everything to be the same. And it's not. Stephen Curry is not LeBron James, is not Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, is not Victor Wembanyama. The great thing about basketball is its biodiversity. And when you legislate against that, you make the game worse.
I think that's such a good point. Like, because you always hear people talk about how like Shaq was impossible to officiate because he was just like his size and athleticism made it so that you could not defend him without fouling him. Like I know like when LeBron was on the Heat and weighed 280, a lot of people talked about him in the same way, where it's like this guy is just physically so big that like the contours of what is acceptable contact kind of have to warp, which like if I was a fan, I think I would find frustrating. But as someone who just watches the league, I actually do feel sort of okay with the fact that you can get away with more against those guys because they just bring more. Like if you were just not allowed to like foul Shaquille O'Neal at all in like 2003, he would put up like 50 a game and it would suck.
Wilt Chamberlain.
Right.
How was Wilt officiated?
He took beatings. He took regular beatings. And if he had been a more ornery character, the player would have been killed. and I'm not, I mean, he literally is, he's the one example I have of basketball actually not getting better after the 60s. He was that much better than everybody else to the point where he might very well be the best single player today. That's how preposterous he was. I mean, he didn't just sit at the low block and dunk or finger roll. He had a fall away jumper from about 15 feet that bank it in routinely. And he was genuinely impossible to stop. So he would be cuffed around a lot. And when he would complain, you'd get official go, "Well, do you need 70 tonight? Is that what we're hearing?" Just play and shut up. You deal with it. Nobody wants to watch you get 100 every night because he would have done it. And so, Shaq is not the first person to do it. He's just the first one, I think, that people of our age remember. But I watched Chamberlain in the 60s, and he was frightening. I used to be a ball boy at Warrior games when they played in the old Oakland Auditorium.
Wow.
They used to have 4 different places they would play. They'd play the Civic Auditorium in the city. They'd play in San Jose sometimes. They'd play in Richmond. They'd play in Oakland. And he could routinely just go up for a slam. And if he wanted to, he could jackknife you from sitting on the basket stanchion, well behind the play. He could catapult you onto the floor. And just watching him, it was jaw-dropping because nobody could deal with him then. He was physically monstrous. And
I know, didn't something like that happen to you? And wasn't it? It was a different player, right?
No, well, it was Lucius Jackson, who was a small 6'10", 285 power forward, who he was unfair back then. He would be unfair today. I mean, there are about 15 players from the 60s who would thrive in the current game, even though the game now is played radically differently, just because they were so physically imposing.
Mm.
And he was one of them. Nate Thurmond was one of them. Every team had a big man who could do that. I mean, Bob Lanier was just ferocious. And so when you hear people say, "Well, they were just playing against plumbers," no, they weren't. Yeah, some of them were plumbers.
Who says that?
Oh, gee.
No, I'm kidding. I'm guilty of it.
Yeah. We have people on staff who do that.
It's true. I mean, there's this is getting us sort of sidetracked, but I feel like as he is the modern player who has the most like, I guess, antagonistic relationship or like close relationship with referees, Chris Paul is retiring. This prompted a lot of people to do the like, is he a top 5 point guard? Let's consider the legacy of Bob Cousy. And that gets us into this like impossible conversation about comparing eras, yada, yada, yada. But I actually have to ask you, like, if you could bring any player from pre-74 into the league, would it be Wilt? Or who would you import
Wilt
forward
would
50
be
years?
first. Well, pre-74 means Kareem. And I assume you don't mean him because he's obvious too. But Oscar Robertson, Elgin Baylor.
Ooh, yeah.
I have to think here. mean, if you were looking for somebody to punch somebody out and have them stay punched out, Zelmo Beatty.
Oh yeah, you put me onto Zelmo Beatty. You're a big Zelmo guy. Is it just because he has a cool ass name?
Well, he had a cool last name, and he was a great undersized center who could frustrate the hell out of the bigger guys because he could play away from the basket. He might do well in this era. But he once threatened the entire Knicks bench by saying, one at a time or all at once, either way, somebody's coming away dead. And nobody left the bench. They just sat there and went, nah, I'll let somebody else be killed. But, that's a side. But probably those three more than any others, because their skills are transferable throughout the history of the game. And I'm sure I'm forgetting a bunch of them, but, those guys for sure.
I always
Gus
loved
Johnson was another one. Could jump out of the world.
Pete Maravich was a big inspiration of me for me when I was growing up. I loved Pistol Pete.
Well, he was, I don't know if there's a real comp for him.
Bones Highland.
Yeah, that would be the one. Maxie Claver.
Yeah.
But I mean, he was a showman who didn't need any other teammates. But that got tedious after a while, and it showed in the fact that he never came close to winning anything because he, would be busy dribbling between his legs at 25 feet, with his foot. People would be mesmerized by it. In the meantime, the Hawks are losing 109-78.
Yeah, it sounds like another Hawks point guard. Did you have I had a question back on the ref topic.
Yeah, go ahead. No, don't go ahead. It's only your show.
Yeah, thank you. You're talking about the personalities and the injection or the I guess the sucking out of the personality over time. And I'm sensing that some of that is like being able to talk back to the ref and like establishing a relationship. But like, can you actually describe like, what do you mean when you say the refs used to have personality and now they don't?
Well, it's not that they, would have windmill foul calls or anything.
No, I like that idea.
It's the fact that when they came on the floor, you A, knew who they were, and B, knew how they worked. And they knew that you knew that, and they did it anyway, because, hey, that's what I do. And the only way you could screw up an assignment is if they put somebody who was uptight with somebody who was casual. Like Dick Bavetta might have been the best official ever for getting along with players. Was he the best official ever? Probably not. But he lasted until he was 70, which is one, a remarkable achievement physically, but two, the fact that he never got tired of doing the job. And there was nobody looking over his shoulder every night going, we don't really think you mastered the art of the 2-minute report. And so you got the sense that you knew them and what they were trying to do. Now you don't know any of them, and you don't know what any of them are trying to do, because half the time they have to clear it with New York before they do anything. I mean, there is no sense now that an official's call is final. It's just, well, we're going to, let's go to the table. I mean, there's nothing more hideous in the entire sport than that. Even if they get the call right, it damages the psyche of the body politic, because it's watching a guy make a phone call.
Yeah, watching them crouch over the little computer, put the headset on. I mean, that at least gives us the theater of Bill Kennedy's line reads, which are great. But as we move sort of from the 90s into the modern era, I want to ask you about the Donaghy thing, because I feel like, we've talked about the technologification and the Garrettification, Garrettsonification, of officiating. But I feel like a referee getting popped for and going to jail for gambling on NBA games, and then in perhaps a cynical attempt to clear his name, perhaps a legitimate feat of whistleblowing, naming several other games that I feel like that is like the biggest possible compromise of public integrity. And like, absent that, maybe the league would be sort of more okay with personality style officiating. But like, what is the legacy of the Donaghy scandal sort of 2 decades after that all happened?
It convinced casual fans that referees are easy to get to. When I think our experience is becoming the fact that no, players are easier to get to than referees are. Because referees are vetted for upright character, whatever the hell that means, more than players are. If you can make a 30-footer contested, it doesn't matter if you bite the head off a greyhound, you're getting a contract. And I think you have to find the way you get a game fixed is not somebody wants to make an extra $30,000. It's that they get in bad with people who say, okay, well, you can't pay me back on that, or I can screw you up. You're going to have to start doing some business. And I think players who are routinely 25 years younger than most officials, and probably more, are more likely to get crossways with stuff like that. But because of the Donaghy thing, people are always going, well, that call came from New York, or boy, that guy was really have something going, on the game tonight, and I've always thought that, and this is to your point, Patty, the integrity of the game can't be gotten back once you lose it, because at that point you're just crooked. You just are. And the one thing that I have always thought the NBA got right is that they got into business with the big casinos early on and said, hey, if you see a weird line move, let us know. Because they're the ones who would find out about it. It won't be the league. It'll be the guy working the window at the Circa. And, they'll go, well, I just had somebody bet $100,000 on Seth Curry scoring less than 7. Is there anything smellier than that? And so but the idea that the NBA is now taking money from the gambling industry makes all the suspicions that much more prevalent. And whatever they're getting from DraftKings is not equivalent to the reputational damage it is doing to itself. And I don't blame DraftKings. DraftKings are exactly who you think they are. But the NBA was always, that's a line we can't cross. And now they routinely cross it because owners like money and they don't care where it comes from.
Yeah,
that answered your question, but it entertained me.
No, that more than answered the question. Like, I don't know, this is something I've talked about probably on this show, certainly on the other podcast, but like I think the experience of people thinking the 2002 Western Conference Finals was fixed and just like trying to square the like spiritual truth of that with the like actual falsehood. Like I really don't like I think actually believing in a conspiracy like that can be like basically give you schizophrenia and is like totally incommensurate with like why you watch sports and stuff. But I think just the experience of having to think through like, okay, would the league really go through with this? Like even thinking about that is like not a fun thing. It can sort of like warp a lot of the joy of it,
Well, yeah, but a lot of people would rather try to explain things they don't understand. And the easiest way to do that is, well, the fix is in. So it's not well, see, you're a purist though. So you're a complete whack job.
It's true.
No, most people want to know things that they don't want to try to learn. They want to just make it up in their heads, which is why nobody understands officiating, but everybody's an expert.
Right. Yeah, it's a good point.
Or, if you try to explain a center's footwork, why some guys have great feet, some guys don't. Most people will say that, but have no idea what it means.
Yeah, let's just say it's good or
just-
bad.
Yeah, it's just they're filling in blanks in their own head. And because they're used to sharing their unasked for thoughts with complete strangers, then they'll say anything. It just, and whatever the easiest conspiracy theory is the one they'll seize on. Like the one where Scott Foster had a bunch of phone calls with Donaghy during the time that he was working. And they immediately went to, well, Scott Foster must be doing business too. Well, I always try to counter that with, so what's in this for the league to keep him on staff for another 23 years? What are they gaining? Does Scott Foster have film of Adam Silver and a schnauzer? I mean, who's kidding who here? When did he become that important to the league? Well, the answer is he didn't. And unless he's the master criminal of the 21st century, he was more a coincidental victim of this than anything else. But people were going to go, well, why was he talking to Donaghy? They must only talk about gambling because Donaghy's a degenerate. And they run from there. I just want to know why he's still working, if any of that's true. Because
and working, like NBA Finals games, like
every year. It's just, I just want to know what's in it for the league, and no one can ever answer that. So I just go, okay, well, maybe they got it. I mean, there were rumors about officials like in the 60s, but they were always disgruntled fans who thought that, Joe Gashu screwed them on a walking call with 9 seconds left in Baltimore. It's a happy default. I didn't get what I wanted, therefore somebody must have stolen from me. No, maybe you left your wallet in the bathroom like you've done 300 other times, you moron.
But moving to a sort of, because my feeling is that we are in the midst of a refereeing shift over the last 3 or 4 years. And it's funny, like I was looking back, so a lot of this starts for me with this 2024 All-Star game, this alleged All-Star game Adam Silver referee memo, because scoring was getting out of control, and Tom Haberstroh and a number of good journalists like started tracking this of like, oh wait, after All-Star game, like the fouls kind of like plummeted, etc. And it's funny to think, I had to reread this like 5 times this morning because I kept getting confused, because this happened in April or March of 2024, and now we're in December of 2025, and scoring and fouls are up again. Like and yet I do remember feeling after that memo, 2 seasons ago, that like the hand checking actually was, they were allowed to hand check a little bit more. It was getting a little bit rougher. So like, I can't. How are you guys making sense of this mid 2020s refereeing gray area war we're in? Because clearly the teams that are pressing really hard, hand checking 90 feet from the basket, like playing at that line of physicality, are some of the best teams in the league. You could say the Pacers and the OKC were 2 of the teams that walk this line. Like and yet fouls are up, which would then make me think that it's not working. So like, I don't know. How do you make sense of this?
Well, it's one of the problems at the NFL. Well, the NBA, the NFL, they all have, is that they try to adjust the way the people they pay to officiate the games. They try to adjust the way they work based on momentary whims. Like there are too many fouls being called. These games are too long. Scoring's too high. We're going to send out a memo. And what that does, above and beyond everything else, it tells the customer, oh, so you can sort of manipulate results on the macro level by saying, okay, let them beat each other up a little more. And then the players complain, and they go, and the officials who are there every night going, why am I taking this much crap for a memo? And they slack back to what their norm is. So I think that's It's perfectly natural, it's perfectly understandable, and it's maddening because it means that the game changes not by fiat of the players and the way they play, but what you can do and what you can't do at any given time. Because again, advantage disadvantage, which is a brilliant thing in theory, is hard to carry off in practice because somebody's definition of advantage is different than somebody else's. And it's not just the Adam Silver memo, it's the Adam Silver memo that was essentially dictated by owners complaining. Because Adam Silver's real job is to keep the billionaires happy. And if you get 8 or 9 disgruntled billionaires who are saying, I think the game's too rough, you got to let them play more. And then you get another 8 billionaires a year and a half later going, I don't think the game's rough enough. We need to get some of that MMA money. So you get different philosophies imposed at different times. And then people forget the philosophy after 6 months because it's a pain in the ass one way or the other. And ultimately, referees, like everybody else, are going to seek the happy medium where they catch the least amount of crap they're going to catch. Just look, the players are used to this. Let's give them this because my job is to keep them playing well. And the owners are going, no, your job is to make me happy, even though I'm in the south of France for the next 6 months.
That billionaire yo-yo point is super interesting. I think, especially to consider like right now in the NBA, where there's this like supposed crisis of like soft tissue injuries, which like if you're a believer in this theory, it's basically that like the way the game is being played now, which is like enabled by the way the game is officiating, is like too hard on people's bodies. And if you wanted to, which I don't really want to, but like if you're a much more trollish person, you could basically say that the way the game is being officiated as like less physical is actually more damaging to players' bodies because you get like all these huge guys sprinting around everywhere. And if you were more worried about getting fouled and hand checked and like knowing that the opponent could get away with that, which like obviously they still do, like Stan Van Gundy was on the Low Post talking about how Kenny Atkinson told him that the Cleveland staff was studying NFL cornerbacks for like foul, like techniques of like things they could get away with. Like you could basically make a case that like the less physical state of play is actually more damaging to bodies. Like, again, I wouldn't, but I think even the fact that you can make that case sort of makes me think that like this oscillating effect is going to be a somewhat permanent condition.
I mean, I could make the case that you're a gazelle. Doesn't make it so.
I don't know. He when he gets cooking, you get him downhill. He does kind of look like a gazelle.
Yeah, I'm on all fours running around. It actually makes me go faster. Dribbling's
That's
a problem.
The part I do believe.
Yeah.
No, Gary Vitti, who was the former trainer for the Lakers, talked about this like 7 years ago, that the way the game is being played, where players are having to cover more distance than ever before and doing more side-to-side moving and less front-to-back moving, is the most wearing thing on joints. And soft tissue injuries are usually not contact injuries. I don't think it's officiating that's doing that. I think it's the fact that, teams like the Golden State basically expanded the amount of floor you have to defend. And now other teams have caught up with that. So everybody's having to defend more ground than they used to. Centers didn't used to sit on the low block and stay there. Now maybe the only person who does that still is Steven Adams. And even then he'll wander off from time to time. I think the nature of the game is asking more of those bodies than anything else. And the other thing that I keep hearing is that NBA players have been playing nothing but basketball since they were 7.
Mm-hmm.
They get tunneled into that one thing because that's going to be the way that dad gets that vacation home in Tahoe. And
or Reggie Bullock gets his own island.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And when you keep using the same, you bastard. When you keep using the same muscles and tendons over and over and over again, they tend to wear out faster. So I think that the combination of those two things are far more responsible for the high number of injuries than shoddy officiating. Shoddy officiating is prevalent, but it's not the reason why guys are getting hurt. I don't think.
I have a referee theory that I've been thinking about related to this. It's been kind of floating in my head, but something about what you guys were saying crystallized this. When a few weeks ago we had Tom Krell on, and he was joking, but kind of seriously also talking about the Oklahoma City Thunder's, towing the line of what is and isn't a foul. And specifically, he hypothesized that Oklahoma City is knowing when refs are not looking at off-ball action and like grabbing on those situations. Whether or not that's true, I think it could be true. I don't know. But the point that I do, when you said that the Warriors extended the field or the court, we always think about like there's more running, et cetera. But it also has the effect of increasing the field of vision where an important foul could be committed. And so like it expands the amount of attention that the refs need to focus on. And I have noticed this. I mean, one of the things, excuse this rant a little bit, but one of the things people always talk about, Steph has a bad whistle gets a bad whistle. The way I square this in my head is like, yes, Steph gets a bad whistle, but every Warriors center sets 100 moving screens a game. And so like their whatever bad whistle Steph might get, they get it back. And my point being, like, I do wonder if as the floor extends and advantages are gotten in corners and 30 feet from the basket and et cetera, you almost maybe need a fourth ref to like be able to cover the extended amount of area where important physical plays are happening.
You are my son, because he grouses about the Curry whistle constantly.
Uh-huh.
And I think part of the problem is that he's terrible at selling a call.
Yes, he is.
And if he was playing 25 years ago, Earl Strom would have walked over and just said, "Who are you bullshitting here? If you want to foul, stand in and take the hit.
Uh-huh.
Don't try to make me an accomplice to your nefarious plans." But as far as the fourth official goes, now you're saying, okay, we're going to hire 30 more guys.
Right.
Or women now, because there are women in the league too. And they're going to be not as good as Brandon Adair. You're not getting, the secret Zach Zarba that nobody knew was working, except that he's a legend in northern Maine. You're going to get the 91st to 120th best officials in the world, which are not nearly good enough. And the other thing, officials don't move around enough as it is. One of the maddening mechanics about the three-person crew is that they tend to go to a designated spot and stand there. Whereas when there were two guys, they had to run the baseline and they had to move constantly to keep an angle between, guy with the ball and the defender. So they had to move all the time. Now, watch any possession. It's like having three potted palms out there. And they're trained to do that. It's not like they're lazy. It's just they are trained not to move. And so I'm not surprised that the working theory about Oklahoma City is they know where the ankles are and they know when to grab a guy and when not to. That wouldn't surprise me a bit. And it is, frankly, a measure of cleverness, even though it is gaming the rules.
It's true.
This also totally validates a critique I'm having with the league, which is like, why are so many refs jacked in this particular top-heavy kind of way? And
they really are.
It's like, what? It's like 5 years ago, all of a sudden, every ref is busting out of the arm sleeves of their shirts.
It's big
because they're not doing cardio.
Yeah. That's the Ed Hockley theory gone bad.
Wait, Ray, I have a counter. And I want to move us into like talking about some of the people who are currently refereeing the game. You say that refs don't have personality, but I just navigated over to nbra.net And every ref has this fun bio full of facts about them. Like, for example, Scott Twardowski, his bucket list is to photograph hot air balloon festivals around the world. I now know that Tony Brothers, the place he most wants to visit is Israel, and his favorite food is fried croakers, or that Merritt Kogut's hidden talent is just listed as magician. So these are all very sparkling, great personality traits. Like, you know, as you're watching Tony Brothers, aren't you like, wow, that guy, he wants to see the world. Isn't that cool? Like, you know, isn't that personality?
What's wrong with you? I'm just going to ask, when was the last time you saw Merritt Kogut work a game where he stopped in the middle and he walked over to Paul George and said, pick a card, any card?
Leon Wood. Leon Woods, he doesn't really have that many interesting answers in particular, but he basically refuses to pick. He's asked his favorite movie and he names 3. His favorite musician, he just says hip hop music. And then the place he would most like to visit, he names 2 separate continents. So Leon Wood, you gotta get more particular, man.
Yeah.
Antarctica and Oceania. No, he understands, as very few people do, is that the less people know about you, the better. Because there will always be somebody in row 3, you know, who's yelling at Gediminas Petrides, you know, hey, how's life in Vilnius, wise ass? You know, just there's no benefit to it. But no, when I say personality, what I mean is, Zarba's working tonight, we're going to get this kind of game. It allows you to be sort of part of the inner workings of it in a, you know, very tangential way, but it makes you feel slightly smarter. And let's face it, you know, ego is part of the deal for fans too, which is why I tend to hate fans.
You mentioned Germanis Petrides, favorite musician, Swedish House Mafia.
Wow.
Hidden talent, ballroom dancing, bucket list, cycling in the French Alps. I want to party with Germanis Petrides.
I got one.
And you absolutely should. But if he comes onto the floor in bike shorts and pulling a Schwinn, you're probably not going to get a good game out of him.
Okay, I got one last one. Mitchell Irvin, favorite musician Drake, favorite app TikTok, would most likely place he would most want to visit Dubai. Really powerful.
Planning for his financial future.
Yeah.
I found a couple of Dubai ones. I forget who it was, but someone their most desired location was Dubai, and their favorite book was Between the World and Me. So it's
that's it. This is Mitchell Irving.
There we go. Yeah,
Between the World and Me. Yeah, and then bucket list is skydiving. So I could see a pretty awesome boys trip.
You know what? Drop him from the rafter one night with a parachute on,
like the Norton antivirus software.
Watch them stand still during the national anthem. I'd go for that. But that's not part of the deal. They want them to be faceless and colorless,
right? Because
they believe that they are an essential distraction from the show, when in fact they help the show work. I wouldn't give them billing, but you know, I would just say, make sure everybody has a fair shot to play tonight. You know, because their real responsibility ought to be to the 10 guys on the floor at any given time. In fact, if they just flipped off coaches routinely, I'd sign up for it, because the coaches aren't part of the deal. The players are. But owners don't like it when players are part of the deal, because that usually means they have to pay somebody. So they want insurance salesmen. and they've got them.
They want Sean Wright, whose favorite app is, quote, Suns football team app.
See that?
I don't know what that means.
That's not personality. That's a little league parent.
That's being a family man.
I don't want him anywhere near any athletes.
No, Ray, I all jokes aside, I think the point is, it's something I haven't heard of, the idea that the ref's personality, quote unquote, being bigger would actually help the game. It's honestly often levied, I think, stupidly, the reverse, the critique being like, this ref is making it about him, which or whomever, which I've never bought as a piece of criticism, because it's like, no, they're not. That's not. They're not trying to do that.
All criticisms of officials are almost by nature misguided.
Yeah.
wrong and should be considered a felony. You know, if you want to criticize an official and get somebody's attention who understands it, he says, that guy does not move on the baseline.
Right.
It just, you have to understand the game to be able to talk about it intelligently, whether it's a player or an official, and frankly, or an owner. There's scandalously little attention paid to the 30 billionaires who are steering this sport into, at best, uncharted waters, and at worst, a gambling scandal that could turn it into, the Patriot League. They're just people who are trying to, they're trying to make the most they can. And if they happen to win, fine. If not, no big deal. But we were talking about perceptions before in gambling. This all started before gambling was legalized, when the Sixers started to say, we're going to just start losing games on purpose. The psychic damage of that move alone all of a sudden meant that every result is transactional. And when everything's transactional, nothing means anything. And, the fact that they were willing to hail that as a great advancement in basketball thought is something they will, if they haven't learned to rue it yet, they will. Because what you've got above and beyond everything else we've talked about is you've got more unwatchable teams than you've ever had before. There are 8 teams right now that I wouldn't watch if the alternative was prison.
Wait, who can you name them?
Well,
Wizards?
Utah. Well, the bottom 5 teams in the West for sure.
Bottom 5? You don't want to watch the Mavs? You don't want to watch Cooper Flag? I find that watchable.
You find everything watchable because you are a better person than the rest of us.
That's why we're good debate partners.
You find joy in many things. You embrace life. You suck. No, but I mean, yes, every team has an individual player that's fun to watch here and there. But in terms of their results or whether you're ever going to be invested in them, absolutely not. I mean, there are more good, for the first time in forever, there are more watchable teams in the East than in the West.
It's unfortunately extremely true.
And that's because the bottom 5 are either actively trying to lose or they're being run by alcoholics.
God,
I mean, who wants to watch Memphis ever?
3-game winning streak. Zach Edey's pounding it. I'm telling you. Shaq Edey.
It's a wonder to me that you have any kind of relationship with a woman. It's a kind of judgment that frankly makes me think you should be living alone.
Grizzlies are 9th in the West. They're not even bottom 6 in the West.
But that's the thing. All you have to do is win 3 in a row and all of a sudden you're in the play-in.
Right. You don't want to know how.
A week ago they were 12th.
God, the West standings really are so bleak. There's like 6 real teams, and then Suns like surprisingly good, Warriors kind of surprisingly mid, and then like everyone else is 3 games below 500. Like, and the Blazers are just like kind of, I mean, Avdia's kicking ass, but they're just free falling because they don't have any point guards or functional big men. It's a bummer.
Yeah. I don't know how many more run.
Above and beyond the real sort of, the psychos like you, Pat, who they find something to enjoy in every game. You are not normal for that reason. There are lots of games where you just turn it off at halftime and just go scrub your eyes out with Windex just to apologize for what you did to them before. And part of that is just the natural offshoot of general managers who get told by their owners, well, why don't we just lose and get a 2% better chance at a draft choice that will probably screw up anyway.
Yeah, I mean, as someone who wants the Kings, well, I guess this is a funny thing. Is like I want them to more actively tank, but I don't really know what they could do. Like,
how would you know?
Yeah, I mean, exactly. Like they could not trade anyone and still end up with the number 1 pick. But
because you can't legislate stupid.
Try as you may.
That's a universal fact in life in general. You cannot make an idiot smart because they're an idiot. They fought for that right, and they hold on to it.
I think that's a great place to end it for today. Speaking as someone who defines that quote, Ray, thank you so much for joining us. This was great.
Well, it wasn't great, but it was a way to kill an hour.
It was above average, you know?